This is the Speaking of Writers podcast. I'm Steve Richards. This is the Speaking of Writers podcast. I'm Steve Richards. The book is Fred Snufflenose and the Baby Ducks. The author is Richard Miller. When Fred Snufflenose finds the empty eggs from a duck's nest, he goes in search of the mother and her babies. His search turns into a bit of an adventure. Will he ever find the ducklings? The events in this story all take place in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, on the grounds of the Central Moravian Church and in and around Monocacy Creek, as well as historic Bethlehem museums and sites. Richard Miller is retired from full-time work. He resides in Bethlehem, PA, with his spouse and their 4 cats. He's the organist at the old chapel of Central Moravian Church, where he also leads the chapel choir and composes music for them. This is Richard's first book. Happy to have Richard Miller join me now here on Speaking of Writers. Richard, welcome.
Thank you, Steve. Nice to be here.
Nice to have you here. So how did this book come about?
Well,
Like a cookie would miss its chocolate chips.
I was down at the church with my spouse, and when I came out from practicing, he said, "There's a duck on a nest in the bushes where he was working." So we saw her there, and we decided not to tell anybody because it's a large church, and we were afraid that there would be a lot of interference with the duck and she might leave the nest. So we didn't tell anyone. And then one day we walked down to check on her and the eggs were all empty, just like Fred finds them. And I tend to be a little bit of a worrywart. And I thought to myself, well, she has to get them to the creek and she's got to cross a busy street to do this. And I'm going to go down and see if I can find them just to make sure they had gotten there safely. And so I did. And as I was going from place to place along the creek bank, I thought to myself, this might make a good story. So when I got home, I sat down and I wrote it immediately and then set it aside for a couple of years.
And then you came back to it.
Yeah, I came back to it this past summer. Um, I have several friends who read the story and encouraged me to pursue getting it published. So I decided to, and it's published.
What was the feeling like when you did get it published?
It was, well, actually, when it finally came out, it was like relief because it seemed to be taking forever, but it was exciting. The process was exciting. Getting the illustrations and approving them and so forth, that was fun.
Yeah, we'll talk about the illustrations in a moment. Let's talk about the location. I have a lot of authors on this podcast over the year, and
Okay.
they always say you write what you know. So, and obviously Bethlehem, you live there. Why this setting for the book?
Well, because I wanted to place the story where it actually happened, first of all, but Bethlehem is a very historic city,
Mm.
and the historic Moravian settlement has just been named a UNESCO World Heritage Site, along with 3 other sites of Moravian colonial culture: Grace Hill in Ireland, Christiansfeld in Denmark, and Herrnhut in Germany. So the fact that it took place in the historic Bethlehem area was significant to me.
Richard, what are the lessons from this story, which I understand were observed after it was written by you?
Yeah, I didn't think much about it as I was writing them, but then when I got finished and talked to different people, there seemed to be a consensus that perseverance in seeking out your goals and fulfilling them, and patience as well, and then kindness and patience with others and patience with yourself and patience with the process. and a general caring for creation, I think, is in there too.
And as part of your creative process, you said you came back to it after a while. Who encouraged you to get it published?
Um, well, two friends of mine, Hank and Karen Naseby, who are members of the church, and then a former children's book buyer from the Moravian Bookshop, who is Jane Clugston, and my cousins and my sister and my spouse, and it was just, yeah, do it, coming
And
from all angles.
and what's been the reaction from everyone, the feedback you're getting on this book?
The people who have bought it are very excited about it. They they recognize that this is something of a triumph for me. Um, it's they're they've all I walked into the church on Christmas Eve for the service, which about 1,000 people attend, and a gentleman jumped up who was sitting in the front row and came running over to me with two books for me to sign. And so that's kind of the signifies how it's been going.
Oh, that's great. And by the way, this book, Fred Snufflenose and the Baby Ducks, available at Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com too. Richard, the illustrations are beautiful in this book. Who did the illustrations?
Well, my publisher is Milton and Hugo, and they have a team of illustrators who worked on this book. So I don't know, I haven't been able to thank them personally because I don't know who they are, but they did a wonderful job. And I was kind of specific about what I wanted. The first shot of the book of the side of the church that actually looks like Central Moravian Church. And the shot in the scene in the historic industrial quarter, that looks like the tannery and the grist mill. So they did an excellent job.
They really nailed it, it sounds like.
Yeah, they did.
So you got a
And
good one. Yeah.
I think that's amazing for my first book
Yeah.
to have that kind of support.
So you got your first one done, and I
Yeah.
understand you're working on a bunch now. So what is going to be next?
Well, I have two more Fred Snufflenose books in the work, and I'm writing based on me. I guess I'm kind of Fred. So there's one about my former cat Felix and how I had to help him cross the Rainbow Bridge. So
Mhm.
it's going to be a little bit of a sad book, but there might be some good lessons in there for youngsters. And then I'm also writing one about Fred Snufflenose helping to build the Christmas puts, which is a large decorated nativity at the church.
And what's the main message that you would like readers to take away from this one?
I think it is that it pays to be kind and caring and engaged. I mean, it just gives you a good feeling to do that. So do it.
How did you come up with Fred's name?
Well, I was just playing around with words, and I came up with Snufflebotham, and then I thought, Richard, your nose is running, so maybe Snuffle Nose would be good, and that sort of stuck. But since then, I found out that there's an author named Snuffle Nose. I think her first name is Nina, so I don't know how that's going to play out, but I mean, she got the name first.
He is Richard Miller. The book is Fred Snufflenose and the Baby Ducks is first. He's got more to come. It's available at Amazon.com and BarnesandNoble.com as well. Richard, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Steve. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you. And this is the Speaking of Writers podcast. This is the Speaking of Writers podcast. I'm Steve Richards.